All right, so picture this. You're finally in New Orleans, ready to hit the French Quarter, but like not just wander around aimlessly, right? We're talking really experiencing it. And lucky for you, we're diving deep into Roberta Hill's blog, 7 Musts in the French Quarter. It's like a roadmap for seasoned travelers, not just, tourists taking selfies.
What always gets me about the French Quarter, or Vieux Carré, as it's known locally, it's not just a pretty face, it's like the heart and soul of New Orleans are woven into every brick and balcony.
Yeah, Roberta mentions that European-style architecture right off the bat, along with that whole bustling atmosphere. You can practically feel the energy just reading her words.
Right. It's that mix of French, Spanish, African-American influences all swirling together. Like every building, every dish, every tradition tells a story.
Yeah.
You can't separate the history from the vibe, you know what I mean?
Totally. Which is what grabbed me about her 7 musts. She gets that right. She goes way deeper than the typical tourist stuff.
You're just talking about using all your senses in your brain. Like, take those wrought iron balconies, for example.
Okay, yeah, those just scream New Orleans, don't they? But what makes them so unique? Balconies are, like, everywhere.
Think about it, New Orleans. Crazy, hot, and humid.
Right.
Way before AC, those balconies were lifesavers. Shade, a little breeze, essential. But then they got fancy. Craftsmen, true artists, started turning them into these intricate, beautiful ironwork displays.
So they became more than just functional. They're like works of art in themselves, just like the city. Speaking of art, Roberta's all about that culinary journey. And let's be honest, New Orleans food is its own art form.
Oh, absolutely. Beignets, gumbo, jambalaya. You're not just eating. You're experiencing history on a plate.
Okay, you said it. Break it down for our listeners who might be unfamiliar. What makes a beignet more than just a, fancy donut?
A real New Orleans beignet, think Café du Monde, starts with this super light, airy dough. Fried, of course, and then just buried in powdered sugar. Now, the French brought the idea over, but it was African cooks who really perfected that texture using their frying techniques and, magic.
See, that's what I'm talking about, those little details that make all the difference. It's not just food. It's like a direct line to that French and African fusion that makes New Orleans, New Orleans. Okay, but what about gumbo and jambalaya? How do those dishes fit into this whole cultural heritage thing?
Gumbo, oh man. Gumbo is the definition of a melting pot dish. You've got those West African influences using okra and French techniques in the roux, and even Native American spices for that extra depth of flavor. Then there's jambalaya, like the Creole cousin of paella, a nod to that Spanish influence on the city's past.
Wow, so each bite is basically a history lesson. I love it. And speaking of experiences that blend cultures, Roberta raves about the music scene, but she doesn't just stop at jazz. She's talking about a whole, sonic tapestry.
Exactly. Jazz might be the heartbeat of the French Quarter,
yeah,
but you've got blues, R&B, funk, even Zydeco adding to the rhythm. And Zydeco itself is a mix of Cajun, Creole, African, and Caribbean influences. Talk about a melting pot of sound.
I can only imagine the kind of energy that must fill those streets each night. And it sounds like that energy spills over into the art scene as well. Roberta highlights the galleries and shopping, especially the Royal Street Art District. What's so special about it?
Royal Street is special because it's like a showcase for local artists who are directly inspired by the French Quarter itself. You're browsing paintings, sculptures, handmade jewelry, and it's like you're experiencing the soul of New Orleans distilled into art.
It's not just a souvenir. It's like taking home a piece of the city's creative spirit.
Exactly. It's about finding something that speaks to you, something that captures the essence of this vibrant historical neighborhood.
And speaking of history, Roberta emphasizes really diving into the French Quarter's cultural heritage through its museums and cultural centers. So for our listeners who want that deeper dive, what are some must visits?
Okay, the Cabildo is non-negotiable. It's this stunning old Spanish colonial building, now a museum dedicated to Louisiana history. Exhibits on everything from the Louisiana Purchase to Mardi Gras traditions, you name it.
Ooh, Mardi Gras. Now that's a whole other deep dive waiting to happen.
Oh, for sure. And for something a little different, a little off the beaten path, there's the Voodoo Museum. It's small, but it gives you this fascinating peek into the history and practice of voodoo in New Orleans, which is, woven into the city's cultural fabric.
Okay, that's going on my list. It sounds a little spooky, but in a good way. Now, I love that Roberta includes the Mississippi riverfront in her musts. It seems like such a contrast to the energy of the quarter's streets. But it's also where it all began, right?
100%. You can't talk about the French Quarter without the river. It was the city's lifeline, this major trade route bringing goods and people from all over. It's the reason the French Quarter exists right there on that riverbank.
It's like you can practically smell that, that salty air and hear those paddle steamboats going by.
Totally. And today, the riverfront, like a breath of fresh air. You can still feel that history, but it's calmer, more reflective. Maybe take a steamboat cruise, see the city from the water, totally different perspective. Remember Roberta talking about experiencing the French Quarter with all your senses? The riverfront, that's where it's at.
From the sights and sounds of the river to that, like you said, that salty air, it's a whole sensory experience. Speaking of sensory experiences, Roberta doesn't shy away from let's say the spookier side of the French Quarter. All those ghost stories, the supernatural stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, think about it. Centuries of history crammed into those streets. No wonder there are ghost stories. But what I find so interesting is how those stories, they're all tangled up with the city's real past. The people, the tragedies, the triumphs.
So it's not just about being scared. It's like these glimpses into the lives of the people who were there before.
Exactly. Their beliefs, their fears, their hopes. It all comes out in those stories. Adds another layer to the whole thing, Like, you're not just hearing a ghost story. You're connecting with the people who walked those streets way back when.
Like Roberta says, experiencing a place with all your senses, even if it means a little shiver down your spine. But for our listeners who are ready to start planning their trips, Roberta gives some really solid advice on getting around streetcars, walking, even guided tours.
And I love that she includes that because it proves a point. The best way to experience the French Quarter. It depends on you, what you're into, what kind of traveler you are.
Some people love those structured tours, all the historical details, while others, like me, we want to get a little lost, stumble on those hidden gems. No wrong way to do it, right? As long as you're present, open to the experience.
100%. It's your journey, right?
Yeah.
So as we're wrapping up this dive into Roberta's 7 musts, what's standing out to you? What's calling your name?
It's that connection, that everything in the French Quarter is woven together. The architecture, the food, the music, it all tells a story, like this living, breathing thing. I just want to get lost in it all.
I love that. That's the magic of it. All your senses, every corner you turn, it just leaves you wanting more.
And that's the thing about the French Quarter, isn't it? It's more than just a place. It's like this living, breathing mix of history, culture, and just... wow, the energy. But like any good trip, it's about going deeper, finding those little things that make it special,
Totally. And that's what I love about Roberta's take on it. She gives you the tools, You're not just checking boxes. You're really connecting with the heart of the place.
She's turned me into a French Quarter detective, ready to uncover all those hidden stories.
That's what we like to hear. So as you're planning your own French Quarter adventure, here's something to think about, okay? Roberta, she really focused on the past, right? All that amazing history. But what about now? How do you think it's changing while still holding on to those traditions?
Oh, that's a good one. It's like that balance, honoring the old while making way for the new. That's what keeps things exciting, don't you think?
100%. And that's the French Quarter in a nutshell. Always evolving, always something new to discover. So yeah, go soak up the history, the music, all of it. But keep your eyes open for those modern twists too, It's like the next chapter is being written right in front of you.
A living story. And we get to be a part of it. Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into the French Quarter. Huge thanks to Roberta Hill for giving us the inside scoop.
Cheers to that. Until next time, happy travels, everyone.